of farmer-driven change, showing how farmers committed to a sustainable future are creating change from the bottom up. Tonight, 4 of our panelists who are here are farmers who are developing similar solutions in our own community, and they're here to share their visions and solutions with us. Perhaps one glaring gap in the film is in-depth discussion of changes needed at other levels of organizations, so things like regional, national, state, federal change. And so we have folks here who can maybe address some of those, panelists who are members of the land grant research community and an organization involved in creating policies to support more widespread development of farming systems less reliant on renewable energy inputs. So I'll introduce these folks briefly. John Bosak, right here, he's a technical standards specialist who lived in Groton during the 1980s. He moved from California back to Ithaca in 2005 with his wife, Bethany Schroeder. The two of them helped form TC Local, where John serves as editor. He's also a member of the Town of Ithaca Planning Board and was recently appointed to the new Tompkins County Broadband Committee. TC Local is a group of people from Tompkins County and surrounding areas who are devoted to helping local policymakers prepare for a future with less available energy. Each TC Local contributor commits to researching and writing an article on a subject relating to local responses to energy descent, such as food security, healthcare, heating with biomass. The current lead article on the website is a complete revision of the liquid fuels outlook since the economic downturn, and it's recommended for anyone who wants a quick overview of the current situation. So they're always looking for new contributors from the area, and if you want to, just check out the tclocal.org website to participate. Let's see. Lori Drinkwater is an associate professor in the Department of Horticulture at Cornell. After receiving her PhD from UC Davis in physiological ecology, she conducted interdisciplinary research comparing organic and conventional farming systems in California. Then she became the director of research at the Rodale Institute in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. She joined the faculty at Cornell in 2000. Her current research and education focuses on agroecology, soil ecology, nutrient cycling, soil organic matter dynamics, biogeochemistry, and organic agriculture, and there are more. The prospect of developing food production systems that enhance ecological processes while contributing to sustainability is a key idea guiding all facets of her work. When not at Cornell, Lori's an avid gardener and a fan of new urbanism. Don Hughes and Mary Rose Livingston own and operate Northland Sheep Dairy in Marathon, New York. They co-manage the farm, or they did co-manage the farm with the farm's founders, who are Jane and Carl North, for 5 years before purchasing the farm 4 years ago. It's now a 100% grass-fed dairy. They produce raw milk, farm-fed cheese, lamb and mutton, and wool products. Don uses draft horses and mules to do most of the farm work and haymaking. Mary Rose uses organic methods and careful pasture management to keep the flocks healthy and productive. The farm also serves as a homestead for both families and provides meat, dairy, most of their vegetables, and firewood for home heating. Melissa Madden is from New Mexico originally. She found Ithaca and then Covert by way of Cornell. She trained on local organic farms, including Remembrance Farm and Cayuga Pure Organics. She currently serves as Cornell University's Organic Farm Coordinator and is a local farmer who manages the horticulture, animal health, financial, marketing, and outreach aspects of the Good Life Farm. Garrett Miller is a local. He's originally from Dryden, New York. His farming background includes time at North Carolina's Turtle Island Preserve and Mark Shepard's New Forest Farm in Viola, Wisconsin. He splits his time as a home builder for his parents, an energy efficiency carpenter with Snug Planet, and he is the orchardist, teamster, and farm infrastructure man on the Good Life Farm. If you breathe, that makes a lot of fun. So thank you, panelists, for coming. We're really glad you could join us. I'd like to first just ask each of you to give a brief overview of your work and how it relates to ideas or themes in the film, especially the role of energy descent, which was central. And then if you want to, in this first section, provide any reactions to the film from your perspective.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, TC Local was founded about 5 years ago, basically in line with what you saw in the film, with the concerns about energy descent. I'll repeat what was said in the introduction, because if you go to our website now and look at the article that's up there now, you'll get as good an overview as I could give you of the energy situation. Okay, so I'm not going to take up our time with that. In fact, I'm going to preserve most of the time, or give my time to the rest of them, so we can get to questions and answers. I will say that as far as I can tell, just about everything you saw in
summarize briefly the work that my lab's involved with can be kind of lumped into two questions. One is trying to understand different kinds of agricultural systems in terms of their ecological efficiency, their nutrient flows, their impact on the environment, and also their productivity, so the yields coming out of those systems. And then the other questions are more centered on looking at how can we manage these systems so that we really take advantage of ecological processes. And that work focuses mostly on nutrient cycling, carbon, nitrogen, to some extent phosphorus, and plant microbial interactions and other below ground processes. So, really it's kind of a new world. We have neglected the below ground world because we didn't have the technology in many cases. So this is an area where there's a lot of new discoveries going on in science, and I think science can contribute to improving our sustainability in agriculture in that area. In terms of the film, I thought they did a really great job on making the point of the issues of fossil fuel dependent food system. So they made many, I think, really good, or provided very good information, and I think could walk people through that who aren't, who haven't come to grips or aren't thinking about that issues. I had one other thing. Oh yeah, and then they also, I think, in terms of mentioning the role of diet and how that impacts energy and land requirements. I think in the other part where they talked about some of the agricultural solutions, they made very good points about how biodiversity can contribute. And the thing I would add is that we really only scratched the surface of the potential for ecological processes and things like managing biodiversity to contribute to food production. And while I think that there's some things in the film that sound really, really easy, like, oh, just go out and plant forests, put the trees that produce, and there you go. I don't think it's going to be that easy, but I think it is possible, and I think there's a lot of farmer knowledge that has already been developed in that area, and I think that scientists can play a role if we get our act together.
Well, I have to make a slight confession. I think that I was invited up here probably because of some of my activities as a farmer, which the confession is I'm also a peak oil nut. Whenever I sit in front of a computer, the first thing I do is I go to my favorite peak oil website and find out what happened that day. So my feeling about this is that our activities on the farm are supporting and helping to discover some new ideas and some new possibilities. But I think as a culture and as a society, I think what we're going to end up doing is reacting to peak oil. I don't think we're going to get to the point in time where we can make wise choices that plan and prepare ahead of time for the events that are going to unfold. So I think that in reality, this is my own personal belief based on my being a peak oil nut, is that we're going to end up reacting. And so the activities on our farm are small contributions that may help in this otherwise unmanaged process of reacting to events that are going to happen to us. I love what we do on the farm. I work with draft animals, and throughout the movie I kept seeing images. There was several images of really big tractors pulling really small combines. It seemed like such a funny mix because we primarily don't plow our farm. It's an upland farm. The soils are best left in pasture. But I plow a little bit because it's so dang fun with horses. And the areas that I plow, I try and use cover crops and rotation and growing vegetables and growing some of the other things that you want to produce in that ground, and I minimize the amount of plowing by rotating these different crops through those areas. And one of the things that we did this year as an experiment was about a small acre of wheat, and once the wheat was ready to be harvested, I found a small 7-foot combine, and I pulled that with horses and mules. So I do a lot of work with horses and mules because it's the funnest thing I've ever done, and not because of peak oil. I think it may be helpful, and I think that we may be developing some things that may be useful, but horses and mules are also the funnest way to farm in the whole world.
But it's your theme. But now I'll talk about sheep. But it's really hard to give a high-minded analysis of the movie because our farm might look as sort of a very positive model in light of this energy descent. But really, we farm the way we farm because it's really fun. We just really like So, you know, it's a great thing what we do, and we're really proud of it, but it's really fun. And, you know, we have a new Amish settlement in our community that we're really excited about. They just came in this summer, and they're all growing corn and growing GMO corn, and they're feeding their Holsteins, and they're selling this milk down the road, and it just murders me, because if there's a great community there that could be growing their animals 100% grass-fed. They could be converting that milk themselves into a protein for their own families and for their community, and so we're kind of we're working on them. So, but Don is a wonderful model on our farm, because even though our farm is already pretty low input, he is always questioning everything we do and eliminating as much outside energy as possible, and he's always thinking about that. So we're always trying to change.
Well, I'm here with Garrett, and our farm is called the Good Life Farm, and it's a 69-acre farm in Interlaken, and we're so lucky to be sitting next to two of our mentors, Mary Rose and Don. It's really great. I feel like we have enormous respect for Martin Crawford from the film, because those concepts are what we're trying to do on a broad scale. We have 45 acres and fields, and we also grow lots of grass, and we try to turn that into something that we can eat as fast as possible. And so I guess the concept, we have three sort of concepts behind our farm, and they're very sort of ethereal permaculture concepts. Care for the community, create a grading environment, and energy descent, which is another way of saying peak oil in my world. And we're really trying to do a bunch of stuff at once. We got our land 2 years ago, and we just wanted to make it, in the words of another one of our mentors, our bunker for when this hits. We interned with Mark Shepard in Wisconsin, who is growing 100 acres of hazelnuts and chestnuts, very similar to what Martin Crawford was talking about in terms of replacing soybeans and corn with nut crops. And we interned with him because we wanted to do something similar. And the main thing I think we got from his farm was go create your bunker as fast as possible. And we were like, yikes. And we did. And that's, I mean, that pretty much drove us really fast and really hard. And so we're trying to put in our farm into place a lot of systems at once, systems that are part of the built environment for cooling and heating, systems on our land that allow us not to irrigate, so different ways of doing subsoiling and plowing, all kinds of different cover cropping. We have multi-species grazing, we have intercropping with asparagus and trees, and we're working on beneficial strips, and it's just crazy right now, but we think it's working. And I think we tend to get tapped as the new farmers, because we have a lot to say about how insane it is.
I would just add a couple things to what Melissa said, and agreeing with Don, of feeling like there'll be a lot of reacting in the future to circumstances that may be out of control, but the idea, sorry, I talk a little slower and think a little slower than this kind of format. The idea that we're putting into place a lot of systems. Right now we're in a kind of a startup phase with our project, and we're kind of using what we call our fossil fuel subsidy. We're using a lot of energy early on in order to establish things that we just know are going to be bound to be useful and are needed, and to restore this land base, because a lot of these systems that we could see providing for people in a low energy future rely on a really robust and healthy land base and ecosystem and soil and forests and all sorts of things that don't necessarily exist right now. So we're trying to kind of really push that degraded land base forward as fast as we can with the resources that we have now, which has involved us going into debt and working at sort of an unsustainable rate for us now, with the idea of that we need we feel a sense of urgency to do some of these larger input things sooner, like bringing heavy machinery onto the farm and making
sure if I need that. I'll start talking until I rise here. So you might remember towards the end of the film, we heard the quote, "We have solved enormous problems in agriculture before." And next I want to continue by building on that hopeful thought. I think it is possible to have enormous changes in how our food is produced and consumed. And we'd like to go through again and just give each of our panelists an opportunity to provide more detailed comments focused on solutions. I was struck particularly by the farmers that we have. You all are really ideologically committed farmers, and I don't know that that's necessarily representative of the bulk of farmers in our region, let alone elsewhere in the country. And so it might be useful to hear from your perspective what changes at the level of policy or even infrastructure changes would make the types of things that you do easier for other farmers to think about adopting on other scales. And for you guys, how can we get involved? What is the role of the land grant? Ways for people that are here to think about, people in the audience could think about contributing.
Well, I'm not one of the farmers, but I'll react anyway. To several things, including to some things that were said by my fellow panelists. In terms of farming methods, the biggest overall change I think we see is that farming is going to return to being a lot more manual. And the reasoning there is really, really simple, and I think these folks will help bear this out. And that is that the less energy you have to fuel machines to do the work for you, the more work you're going to have to do. So what Heinberg was saying in the movie about more farmers, I don't know if he said that in this particular movie, but he said this country's going to need 50 million more farmers. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is everybody's going to be doing gardening. Everybody's going to be raising some of their own food because of the cost of food and the difficulty of getting it to us. I'll save some of my comments for later, but in terms of what we can do here, from a public policy standpoint, there are some things we can do. One thing we can do is promote local agriculture and treasure our local farms and farmers. And one of the concrete ways, besides just ordering local food and doing that, is affecting the land use policies of our local municipalities so that we stop developing farmland and taking it out of production. This is a major deal, and it's a big struggle even at the local level here. Another thing I'd like to say just before passing it on is that while the future looks really different, it probably won't happen all at once. So when folks say things like bunker, which I totally resonate with, I totally agree with that, you have to interpret that within this, not in the sense of somebody sitting on top of a somebody sitting on top of a mountaintop. Wow. I'm going to have to think about that. There's some history there you guys don't know about it. Somebody sitting on top of a shotgun, and that's not it. I mean, we're going to have to approach this as a community. That's really what that boils down to. And now from the real experts.
And what I'm going to say is in the context of recognizing that we really do need to go to more regionalized, localized food systems that you brought up. So I'm just going to give 3 examples of some work that's going on that is coming from the research world that I think can contribute. And I'm not even trying to touch the whole peak oil. I mean, it's a very large problem with a huge structure that we're all sort of embedded in. One is there's work, well, people have been talking for a long time about perennial crops and about perennializing grains, for example, because they're such an important food source. And there's been work in the Northwest with perennial wheat that's been going on. I think they're in their 4th or 5th year or so. They are at the point of testing some varieties. And I think this idea of having perennial grains as one component of our diet is really something that's compatible with agriculture at a smaller scale. It has many environmental benefits, and I won't list them. I think a lot of them touched on there. And it wouldn't represent. I think it would be a complement to the woody perennials like trees in our food system. Another is we need to understand more about how to use all of the plants that are out there. There's an entomologist at Michigan State who's been doing work with the native perennial flowering plants and looking at, well, which plants are really more attractive to natural enemies. So, if you're going to be using plants as habitat, forest border or have a, fields that have the right plants. And so that group has actually been screening lots of different species and finding some pretty significant differences in terms of the kinds of beneficials that they're attracted to. And that would be a way for us to really fine-tune and be much better, much more effective at bringing natural enemies back into the landscape when we have to devote a fair amount of it to food production. And then the third example is closer to home to the work in my lab, where we believe that legumes, which are, that's one of our best solar technologies. I mean, it's been evolving for a very long time. And it's really been neglected in conventional agriculture because of cheap energy, because, nitrogen fertilizer is so inexpensive that the cost of legume seeds and other costs associated just can't even compete. And as the price of fertilizer goes up, though, farmers are kind of switching over and getting interested in legumes again. And these are things like clovers, beans, peas, and those sorts of things. So we do work looking at how can we manage legumes, what's most important, the plant species, what's the role of the microbes, what other kinds of management practices can farmers use to optimize nitrogen fixation and to manage it efficiently. So those are just three concrete examples. I'll do that.
Thank you. I guess the one thing I'd like to touch on is something that Mary Rose started to allude to in that we're looking at the energy on the use on the farm in such a way as not what have we achieved, but what can we continue to change. And I would say it's more than just the energy. All the systems on our farm, the water systems, the ecological systems, the nutrient systems, I'm not so much looking for the perfect system for our farm as much as I'm thinking about becoming adaptable so that we will be able to change when we need to, and not anticipating that next year I'll discover the perfect way to make hay or make compost or spread it. But much more important to me is that we be comfortable with the idea that we could continue to adapt and could continue to change, and hopefully it will continue to be able to feed us and feed our community to some extent if we can do that, if we can adapt that way and find the foods that we need to find, and I think that's going to be one of the most important things that we can do. So just in what we grow milk and cheese because we have a great market, because we make money from it. But a financial collapse could change that. And we still have the rich soil, we still have the animal power, we still have a lot of the nutrients there. We just have to start growing some vegetables that people that live a couple miles away want. And they don't want sheep's milk cheese, they want potatoes. So we're going to have to be flexible and smart. And my idea about bunkers is this. You have to draw a line somewhere, and my line is, I don't want to be in a bunker. My line is, my bunker is going to be my community, for better or for worse, and that may not be perfect, but that's my limit. And my limit is, what people around me are willing to join in for, and I'm willing to go part way and try and feed people and try and produce whatever I have to produce to do that. But that's my idea of a bunker in the future.
In terms of thinking of a way forward or some of the policies that we could think about, I love being a farmer. I didn't come from a farm family, but I love what I do, and so I'm really passionate about other people becoming farmers. So we've had the really good fortune to be involved in some programs for educating beginning farmers through the local Groundswell Center for Food and Agriculture, summer practicum that they put on this last summer, teaching people farm skills, and that to me is the way forward. And apprenticeships, and we have apprentices on our farm, and so that to me is very exciting because I'm really a dairy farmer at heart. That means I don't like to change anything. I like to do the very same thing every day, and that's true. That is really my character. And it's very true of most of the farmers in our community, which is small family cow dairies. And they're killing themselves. They're not making any money. They're working like dogs. They hate what and it's really depressing to see it. And it's really hard to change them. So, you know, I think the only way we can really go forward is to train new farmers and to encourage more people to be farmers. I mean, we've had a lot of Cornell classes come to our farm, and we've talked to classes at Ithaca College a lot, and the first question I always ask is, who wants to be a farmer? I think out of all the classes we've had, one person raised their hand. So, you know, this is a big thing to me. I really not only am interested in training people who already know they want to farm, but encourage other people to be farmers. And it's not easy, but it's great. Paul's over there raising his hand. We know, Paul. We know.
I feel like I really opened a can of worms by saying the word bondage. I just want to say that's not my language. I inherited it, but it resonated on a certain level. I think that it is true that if you're going to be a small farm, you can't do it by yourself, and you shouldn't expect to. I'm going to just answer the land grant institution question because I have alternate interest, which is that I'm the coordinator for the Dillman Hill Student Farm. That is your student farm if you're a Cornell student. And I actually think that Dillman Hill is doing a really good job trying to answer some of these questions. We have a diversity of projects that address a lot of very current real-world concerns like soil contamination from heavy metals, which is something you can have in an urban or a rural environment, and perennial plantings for beauty and food and multiple yields, which is one of the foundational principles of permaculture agriculture. And then the market garden, which I think probably most people are most familiar with, which grows nice vegetables for sale on Cornell's campus. And I think that that's a really important thing for students on this campus to be involved in, because it's here for you and it exists because of you, and if you're not there, then it probably doesn't going to exist anymore. We've been growing very steadily and doing quite well, and I think it is a good place to get not only these sort of technical experiences that we're talking about, but something that when you're training to be a farmer, you need to have the opportunity for failure without intense repercussions, and I think that that's a really important part of Dillman Hill. And I'm really grateful that we were on Mark Shepard's farm where we made some incredibly stupid mistakes that we didn't have to pay for forever. And now we're in a certain amount of debt, and our mistakes hold a lot more weight at this point. And we're still making them, but we're not making the mistakes we would have made without the training that we received at the hands of others. So as someone who's just recently exited the apprenticeship paradigm, I completely agree. I think that without that paradigm, you're going to set yourself up for a really hard road, and it's already hard enough. I wanted to I wanted to respond to Don's comment about adaptability with resources. Do I still have time? Can I keep talking? I'm sure Garrett's going to say something else. One of the principles of our farm is to have as much production from perennial crops as possible. And so we actually we bought it, that was very well suited to annual agriculture, and the farmers around us were furious when we planted it to grass because it's a very deep, well-drained, lovely silt loam soil, and it's great for plowing, and it dries out really early in the spring, and just great. And we just put grass over the entire thing, which is something that in this area people usually
Sacrilege.
Yeah, people don't usually do that with that kind of soil in this area. But our concept was first to stop it from washing away, which was happening during heavy rain events, and secondly to kind of provide a foundation for these perennial crops that we've been putting in, because I think they are the foundation of flexibility. Perennial crops take a lot of energy to establish, but if you have a really good establishment phase, you can start to move more towards a dry farming, less input-intensive paradigm over time. I didn't get to see the film because I was dealing with our animals, but I'm wondering if Martin addressed that at all. The startup of a forest garden is incredibly intensive, but 5 years out, your input would be drastically reduced. So we have 2 acres of asparagus that we required 4 miles of drip tape, and we intensively irrigated it in 2009. And even though this past season was a dry year, we didn't irrigate, and we're not going to next year we actually did a special type of plowing that creates subsoil channels for water movement. We're not going to irrigate. So I'm going to stop because I realize I've talked a lot. But I think I just wanted to kind of put out the plug for perennial plants, and particularly in polycultures, the way that Martin Crawford was describing as building a resource base for the future. And that has to happen now, because if you want hazelnuts, in 7 years you need to plant them today.
This is a little side note to that too. I feel we've been very excited about perennials for a long time. Me and Melissa, that is, but I'm starting to feel more and more that annual, like a really healthy mix of annuals and perennials are going to be a really highly adaptable solution. I mean, annuals have another adaptability that perennials don't, which is that you can plant them whenever you want. They're not always in the ground. They flower at a certain time from their planting date. Where I'm just thinking about the apple trees that we planted, and the blossoms get fried on a frost, and since the climate is changing and and the frost is coming at odd times, the perennials in some ways are less adaptable than these annuals. So just diversifying and diversifying and diversifying. But the thing I've been thinking about this, the possible policy things that come to mind, and I have no real solution to it, but something that on a day-to-day basis that we come up with in our farm is that we're calling a lot of the systems that based on something that someone else made up, that the systems on our farm are bioextensive, meaning that they're using a lot of land. We're kind of replacing human labor with land base. We're having long rotations. We're using animals and fallow periods and the natural ecology over a broad scale to replace having a lot of people doing a lot of hand work. And that in itself is not really a long-term solution, because we're taking up a lot of land and not producing a particularly high production per acre, but it's not taking me and Melissa a lot of work, as much work to do it. Okay. But with the idea that to bring more people into it, it's a really challenging thing to have more people, to intensify management and have production higher per acre on our system, because hiring people is really expensive to get labor and pay workers' comp on somebody and have the liability insurance and employ someone full-time is a challenging thing. And a lot of the things that we're getting into are that would be appealing in a low energy situation are labor intensive. And so it's the question is in my mind all the time, how does that work out? It seems like there's some creative opportunities with multiple farmers working together on a similar land base with multiple businesses that are somehow relating to each other, or apprenticeships or educational opportunities. But the vast majority of people who do hand labor on farms are not American. They're not earning an American standard of living. And it's just kind of a question of what's going to change. Are people going to start paying a lot more for food and paying so that we can get this hand labor on farms, or people are just going to start earning a lot less money and have a lower standard of living, which is currently what's happening with people who do hand labor on farms. They have a lower standard of living than what we would expect. And so I don't know what the answer is to using more land to have less energy intensive farming, or getting more people in somehow. That kind of thing.
Can I respond?
Alright, it is a lot of work. We do a lot of work.
I wanted to give an example. This year we ran turkeys through our asparagus. You have to time that properly so they don't destroy the asparagus. But I do want to say the point of a polyculture, a really well-functioning polyculture, is that you have a significant yield per acre. But you have to figure out how you're going to manage that many crops in one space. And I just don't want the impression left that we expect to get really low yields per acre.
Permission to say one thing. I want to apologize to Melissa because I deliberately took her comment about bunkers out of context in order to make a point. The reason I did that is because when most people hear about energy descent and peak oil, they go one of two different ways at first. Either they adopt what's been called inappropriate optimism, which is like, we'll figure it out, don't worry about it. There's a psychologist who calls this Panglossian disorder. And I agree with that. And the other half are people who get it and go, oh my God, and head for the hills. And it takes a couple of years to get past that, all right? And I know that's not where Melissa was coming from, but I couldn't resist the opportunity.
No, it was.
Well, it's not going to work.
So that's great. I think we're going to open it now to questions from the audience. If you have questions specifically for the panel, that's great. I know quite a few of you here, and I know we have a really broad range of expertise and interests. I think the film focused on a very highly industrialized country, and we have folks here who work in other regions of the world who might have some comments. We didn't hear a lot about social issues or maybe the political economy driving a lot of this, so please pipe up if you have comments as well. Try to keep questions or comments brief to give as many people as possible the opportunity to participate.
I have a question, maybe a little off topic, but watching the film, I was interested to see at the very end there was a deer that jumped out. And where I live in North Carolina, there are deer that jump out all the time. I suspect you have white-tailed deer up here too. So how do you establish a forest garden with, you know, melons and everything else going on and deal with white deer? It would be impossible for me to have my garden if I didn't have a fence all the way around and 6 feet high.
I think one thing we do that I've considered is that we have an artificially high population of coyotes, or domestic coyotes on our farm. We have dogs, and we bring in off-farm inputs to feed those dogs so that they hang around and chase things. But we don't have a lot of deer.
We put a 35-acre invisible fence around our farm, actually, because we, one thing about the transition to really, really resilient crops is that they often are not the same crops that match up with the existing agricultural markets. So we chose not to start with quince and hybrid bush hazelnuts and Chinese chestnuts. We chose to start with apples and peaches and pears because we can sell those, but they're also more expensive, and now they're going to require us to protect them. So we have chosen to use dogs as our, it's actually something a lot of orchards do, like if you're bioextensive, invisible fence.
But in a broader sense, you're talking about something that we have, it's adaptation. Because even in a pasture, deer, actually we're talking about today, deer cause one of our bigger problems. There's a parasite that is directly related to deer pressure, and that we're learning to manage our sheep for all different kinds of deer, for all different kinds of parasites, using organic methods and different pasture methods. And one of the hardest parasites to deal with is the one that we get from the deer. So it's another case of learning to adapt, and it's a really valid question. I mean, I think your question is somewhat rhetorical because deer are impossible to put those things out there in the forest. You can't even get a maple tree to grow, you know. So deer is a big problem.
Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, in the movie they mentioned a few times about how we're going to have to stop eating as much meat and producing dairy and things. I was wondering what the dairy farmers thought about that. If that's something you think about, or if something you agree with.
So we go into our bunker.
Yeah.
And we hoard the milk.
Yeah, it's so hard because it's hard for us to remember what everyone else lives like, because we live on we eat a lot of meat. We eat an extremely high protein diet ourselves because we produce it all ourselves, and so we're surrounded by it. So it's very hard for me to have a perspective on that, but I really do believe that grass turned into protein by ruminants is a really wonderful food source. Now there's a big problem with it, and that is in order to produce that meat legally for sale to people in a way that's somewhat affordable and locally produced, we have this really bad bottleneck in terms of butchers, slaughterhouses, abattoirs. They're very, very few and far between, and it's getting more and more critical all the time. So those protein sources are going to be less and less available to people. So I don't know if that's getting at the heart of your question, really.
I've got a response to that. So. Yeah, let me respond to that. There's actually, again, I sound like I'm promoting our website. If you go to tclocal.org and go back about a year in the articles, you'll find an article called "Can New York State Feed Itself?" in which we give you a overview of some intensive research that was done right here at Cornell on that question, or that included that question. We've so gotten used to the assertion that the maximum carrying capacity of a given piece of ground is purely vegetarian, that we've lost track of the fact that it depends on where you are. It so happens that in New York State, the most, the diet that gives you, that supports the most people is a diet that includes some meat. Reason being that it's complicated, but the basic reason being that the limiting factor where we are is not cultivated ground, it's pasture land. Or the limiting factor is cultivated ground.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So that by the time you've used up all the cultivated ground, you still have a lot of pasture land left over. And if you put animals on that pasture land and let them forage, you get all this extra protein for no work at all in terms of cultivation. Okay, so all I'm saying is go look at the charts and the graphs and check it out. But it's not nearly as easy a question as everybody makes it out to be.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I would agree that it's not an easy question because it is, can you hear me? So, can you guys hear me in the back? No? Okay. You know, the reason people make this comment about reducing meat intake is part of it's based on the way our meat is produced right now because we're feeding grains to animals that could be fed to people. And so we spend a lot of fossil fuels and a lot of chemicals and we use up a lot of land intensively growing these grains and then raising these animals, and it allows people to have a very high protein diet based on meat. And these are people that are not necessarily raising, you know, that's, you know, what you're growing. If you're a farmer, you're going to eat a lot of that. My father ate a lot of potatoes in Maine. So when you look at where we are, we definitely have to change. And we can use animals on the land that's sloped, that shouldn't be in crops that we're growing intensively, but then you're thinking about a system where we have intensive tillage with big machines. So I think that in the future we're going to have to think about how we use sloping land. How much of it do we use to grow perennial crops for human consumption? How much of it do we use to grow animals, and you know, do we combine them? And there are some nice combinations. I think an example was used now. So we have to look at the fact that the extra layers of the food web, when you know, with people, it's just the same as with animals. So when you've got, you know, the plant eaters eating plants and then a higher carnivore eating those animals, you have less energy moving up the food chain, so you can support. That's why you have the food, you know, I mean not food web triangles with smaller at each trophic levels, because you're only about 10% efficient, so you lose energy. So in a world where we have a huge population that's supported by this fossil fuel, so this artificial energy source, I think we will have to reduce meat consumption in many parts of the world if we're going to try to feed, you know, if we're going to try to feed the rest of the people.
Well, I should add that even here, the study showed that the optimum diet was one in which people ate a lot less meat than they do now.
Right, some meat is not
some
the
meat.
American, yeah, right. Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, just like Mary Rose is talking about having sort of, you know, this intense relationship with her herd, I have an intense relationship with my leguminous trees. So I can't help but ask people to make comments on the roles of leguminous trees in some of the kinds of gardening / farming that we saw in the movie. If anybody has anything to say about them other than me, that I love them.
I'll be really quick and just say that, you know, I think there's a potential for nitrogen fixing trees, but I also think we don't know very much about them.
Oh darn, I was hoping you were going to give me a citation.
And
okay.
well, no, just because a person who worked in my lab for a while did some work in the mixed coffee systems, and her work was just a beginning. It made it look like they really weren't fixing much nitrogen at all. So I think there's just, you know, we really don't understand how much nitrogen are they actually fixing, and then if they're not, well, you know, why not, or what can we do? So we know a lot more about annual
legumes than we do perennials. And
Well, and I
roots.
suppose it might be really different based on the root system of the leguminous tree as well.
Oh yeah, and the microbes and yeah. Anybody else want?
We have a non-expert opinion on that.
I'm not an expert on perennial legumes. That's just yeah, I just.
It's sort of the perennial tree legume that we use on our farm is not directly in our cropping system, but we're promoting it in our forest. We use black locust a lot on the farm as the predominant wood that we use. We use for farm outbuildings, farm construction, fence posts, anything that we're building on the farm. We need more of it. We're using it really rapidly from our forest, and so we're trying to promote it in the forest so that we can have it for routine use through the years. So we're trying to put it into a short cycle yield pattern of coppicing it, of creating small pulpwood for us to use for farm use. And it's a really vigorous tree, and maybe it has to do something with its leguminous properties, I don't know, but it's becoming really important to us, and every time a new building project comes up and we realize that our sugar maple black walnut forest is not providing the things that we need for our type of agriculture, does not a lot of other nice things, and has really good value in the open timber market and also whatever that value is, but it's not providing direct yields for our agricultural needs. So we're experimenting with copies.
But you probably know more about that than we do, Chris.
Maybe not. We talked about it.
So I think many of us here are probably not overly optimistic at federal level policies dealing with farming, but I'm wondering if the practitioners here feel that there's state initiatives or local initiatives that have supported them, or is most of their support structure from other farmers? And is there stuff that people who aren't farmers can do to support the kinds of things that will wind up supporting local agriculture?
We've actually received a lot of support on both the state and federal level through the we got into the New York State Graze New York program. You guys? So we're getting a good amount of our fencing paid for and water systems paid for, and for a startup farm that's really essential. I don't know if that really, I mean, I could just reel off all the ways we've gotten help basically. So Graze New York through the soil and water conservation districts of each county, and we are in Seneca County, has been incredibly helpful to us. They were a little delayed in giving out their money because of the state budget not passing for an extraordinary long period of time. But we're getting pretty much our whole fence paid for, a 16-acre fence, high-tensile 4-strand fence, and a water system, a gravity-feed water system through that program. We also are in the Natural Resource Conservation Service program, the EQUIP program for forestry and for transition to organic, and there's a lot of support there. There's a lot of theoretical support for creating appropriate cropping plans and actually money to back up, like getting consultation services and stuff. I'd say NRCS is still trying to make sure they have the appropriate consultants on their list, and I tried to convince someone in this audience to become one of those people. But I think they're trying, actually. I feel like, and we have funded half of our farm through the Farm Service Agency. The Beginning Farmer Loan Program is really powerful. So I feel very optimistic, actually. But,
Yeah, I'll just say that those programs are great, but they are geared towards startup farms. You know, we got a little bit of money for a water system, but since our infrastructure is there, like, we have to replace all our fencing. It's really falling apart, but there's no help for that.
Graze New York, it's just started.
Yeah. Anyway,
Well, I think those programs are good. We still need more. We need programs and support that are looking to help the young farmers answer some of these questions, some help provide some direction. And so there's still lots of opportunity to do more. There are some programs that are helping. Lots more opportunities to do more.
I'll say something really quick. So I'm not a practitioner, but